suggest, we will be talking about women and the inclusion in terms of using formal financial services. Um, I think there is a statistic which has been going around and people have seen it already, and that talks about the gender gap in financial services and access in Pakistan. The statistic is embarrassingly high, uh, and it shows that not only is there a large gap, but also that gap is increasing. And the situation is quite bad when we compare ourselves with other developing countries and also with our South Asian neighbors. So for this reason, there is a need to take action right now, right away. And all of the formal financial institutions and private sector entities need to take this issue very seriously, and they need to start doing something to address this large gap. Karandaaz takes women's financial inclusion and women's economic empowerment very seriously. And we have a couple of divisions and programs that are working to address the gap. We have a program by the name of Women Ventures, and a lot of people are already familiar with that, which offers grants to businesses led by women who have innovative business models. At the same time, the Digital Financial Services team also endeavors to support women's financial inclusion through a couple of its programs. We have a challenge fund round, then we have digital experiments, we provide support for design thinking, and we also do pilots with willing enable partners. So one such pilot was conducted with Finca Microfinance Bank. As mentioned already, women in Pakistan are not using formal financial services, but we've seen that in other countries, female agents and female sales staff has been very influential and very successful in motivating women to take up these financial services. For this reason, Karandaaz and Finca together launched a pilot on female roaming agents. Just to be clear on definitions, so agents are the ones that help with cash in, cash out transactions and also sending and receiving money and assisting with other transactions. Typically, the agents in Pakistan are mostly male and they have some sort of small shop from where they offer their services. So we carried out a small pilot in which we set up female roaming agents. So they were not limited to one location. Rather, they were mobile and they helped to address the mobility barrier faced by women. And this pilot was carried out in KP. So it was a small pilot, but the results of this were quite interesting. And we want to share those results with a wider audience. The intent is very simple. We want more and more financial institutions to take up this model, if not completely, then at least borrow some of the learnings from this model and try to implement it in their own organizations as well. We'd start off this session with some comments from Finca Microfinance Bank. Afterwards, I'll make a brief presentation that highlights the learnings from the pilot. And towards the end, we'll have a panel discussion with international experts from Women's World Banking, CGAP, and the Jail Macmillan Research Center. So I'd hand it over to Ms. Samra Noori, who is the head of marketing at Finca Microfinance Bank, to share her comments about the pilot.
Thank you, Amna. Hi, everyone. This is Samra Noori, Head of Marketing at Finca Microfinance Bank. Amna, do you want me to switch on my video? Are you switching yours off? Okay.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Amna, for the introduction. Just to give everyone a background on what Finca does and what Finca believes in, we use fintech technology to expand financial inclusion in some of the world's most challenging markets, and Pakistan being one of them. We are led by the mission to increase financial outreach and improve financial health of our users, especially women. We have always believed that when a woman has access to financial services, it's not only she who benefits from it, but her entire family does, as well as the community that she belongs to. So with the same aim to create a digital financial ecosystem whereby women entrepreneurs could use technology to overcome the challenges around access, and awareness. Finca being the first MNO agnostic offering free of charge transactions through mobile wallets, both English and Urdu, joined hands with Karandaaz in 2018 to carry out the Women Community Mobilization Project that we have all gathered to discuss today. There were two very simple objectives of the pilot. One, to gather data to understand what the financial needs of the women in Haripur were. Two, to analyze the data and develop suitable use cases to serve these women better. And both these objectives, I'm sure, will be discussed in a much more detail during Amna's presentation. I would, however, like to share that it was quite an insightful journey to test various use cases and to bring digital financial services to the doorsteps of these rural women in Haripur, taking them from absolutely zero participation in the digital financial services space to a position where they had their own active banking accounts that they could use for savings, for transactions, and for access to credit. Um, Through this project, we acquired around 500 female wallet holders. We tested the roaming female agents model, which Amna briefly highlighted, and it was quite a success. We learned ways to better manage the relationship with the middle entity, the community mobilization entity. We successfully tested digital ROSCA product. ROSCA, for those who don't know, ROSCA stands for Rotating Savings and Credit Association. It's more widely called committee in our local language. We also tested the pilot for digital lending for the community of Haripur through an existing nano loan product. Um, we can consider running a similar project on the same model in other rural and semi-urban areas of the country, especially now when there's a need to identify critical gaps in the current and the future demand for services generated by the pandemic. And we would want to be able to respond to these gaps by either expanding or tailoring our offers of digital financial products. And we all see at the end, I would like to say that there's a like a lot of evidence that demonstrates that women entrepreneurs are a very important source of growth for value and add value to businesses, investors, financial institutions, and economies. I believe that the ongoing pandemic has also revealed a lot of potential for digital payments and mobile wallets. And the current environment provides an excellent opportunity for us fintechs, for FIs and MFIs to really ramp up their contribution to the economy and to the society. So I would like Amna to take over and take us through the findings of the pilot in in detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Samra, for your comments and for providing a snapshot of the intervention. We're grateful to Finca Bank for their cooperation during this pilot. And also, Samra rightly pointed out that this is the right time because, for one, there's the pandemic that presents us with new challenges as well as opportunities. I'm sorry, in addressing women's financial inclusion. And at the same time, State Bank also has allowed these roaming agents during the course of the pandemic and also has recently launched their gender policy, which encourages financial service providers to think seriously about ways by which they can increase the representation of women in their portfolio. So on this note, I'd like to move to the learnings from the pilot. Harun, if you could please share the slide deck. So if we can go on to the next slide. So in my presentation, I'll just briefly touch upon the design of the pilot. Samra has already provided a snapshot. We then discuss the results from this intervention. And after that, we would discuss what worked, what didn't work. So what worked, how was the channel developed, how were the resources trained, how did they market their services, and what didn't work, what are the things that we can learn from this exercise, and what can other financial institutions do in a better way. The next slide, please. So in this case, the model of female roaming agents was structured in the same way that the rural lady health workers operate. For that purpose, a community mobilization entity was engaged. The destination for the pilot was selected to be Haripur. As this was a small scale exercise, so 8 female roaming agents were hired. The objectives of this activity were to one, open mobile wallet accounts for rural women in KP, then to encourage the usage of those wallets for day-to-day transactions, and the target was 3 transactions per month, and then also offer new digital products to these women through the app, which included both nano loans as well as a saving Roscard product. Next slide, please. So here we can see the results. So 478 accounts were opened. 80% of these were held by women. 20% men also registered because they were curious and they were interested in these accounts. And in those few cases, the women were unable to open the accounts in their names. So we also had to engage men in this exercise. We can see the transaction values, 5 million rupees worth of transactions, 4,000 transactions were made. Mobile recharge and bills were the most popular use cases. Rupees 500,000 worth of these use cases were seen. Nano loans were extended worth rupees 200,000, and the value of the Roscos was 56,000 rupees per month. So these were small committees, but a couple of them were launched. So this was what happened right at the end of the pilot. But then later on, Finca conducted a survey. So if we can go on to the next slide. So we wanted to see if the wallets are still active and if women are still using those wallets. So we did find out that 64% of the women had been using the wallet for a year, and another 21% had been using it for more than a year. Also, the accounts were opened at different points in time. So for this year, there was a slight variation. We did monitor the purpose for which these mobile wallets were being used. So we saw that mobile recharge was the most popular use case, followed by bill payments, and then sending and receiving funds. Interestingly enough, we saw that 34% of the women were also using these for savings purposes, and this is distinct from the committee slash Rosca product. So even when they were not incurring any interest, they were still saving money in these wallets. Moving on to the next slide. So now we look at channel development. How was this operationalized? What were the factors that should be given attention to? So starting off with the recruitment of the roaming agents. So these positions were publicly advertised. A competitive process was followed. The important thing to keep in mind is that proximity to the client matters. So for this reason, these women were locally recruited. Women do face significant challenges when it comes to covering large distances, moving from maybe one town to another town. So they should be close to the customers. And also, given the cultural context of Pakistan, it's important that we engage women to deal with women. And that has been a driver of financial inclusion in other parts of the world as well. The roaming agents that were selected through the competitive process were somewhat educated, so they had done either matriculation or intermediate degree. They were smart. They did not necessarily have a technical background. Sorry, we can go back to the recent slide. So they did have smartphones, but they were not using these smartphones for financial transactions, and that is fine. That information can be taught to them. The most important criteria used was that they should be comfortable with moving around in the community, interacting with women, and they should have the ability to mobilize other women. So some of the roaming agents recruited were working for other NGOs. KP does attract a lot of donor attention anyway, so these were not difficult to find. Some were in running their own businesses, such as a beauty parlor, which allowed them to interact with a large number of women. Also, if women are engaged with the education sector, or if they are going door to door serving as vendors, they can also be make suitable roaming agents. And in some cases, the husbands were either involved in politics, or they were the local nazims, or they were the village elders, which allowed them influence, and which also allowed these women to interact with a large number of women in their surroundings. Moving on to the next slide. So these women were hired, and then they were given training on how to use the app, and they were given information on digital financial literacy. After that, they were also taught about the different financial products and services offered by Finca. Next, since the most important job was sales, so they were taught the basics of how to make a sale, how to handle objections, how to persuade clients, how they're going to pitch the value proposition to the clients, negotiation skills, etc. Detailed action plans were made, targets were assigned, they were told on what sorts of performance metrics will they be evaluated. And these were not one-off trainings, there was hand-holding along the way as well. So there was regular mentoring and coaching that was given to these women. Initially, the conversion rate was not very high. So for the first quarter, for the first few months, these roaming agents were meeting a large number of women, but they were unable to onboard them as clients. But that changed after the first quarter elapsed, and then the conversion rate improved. And these roaming agents also gained in terms of confidence, and the community also became more comfortable with what they were offering. Next slide, please. So in terms of the target customers, these roaming agents targeted all sorts of women. Some of them were already connected to them. They were more literate. They were better off users. They were already using smartphones as well. And on the other hand, there was also the segment which was relatively illiterate or less educated. These included young and old housewives. And to the extent that they were unable to make the transactions on their own initially, and the agents had to assist them with the transactions. The chart here shows the profiles. So a lot of them were housewives, whereas others were economically active in different capacities. So basically, there was no restriction in terms of the target customer that you can reach out to. It's just that the way you interact with them would have to be different. The roaming agents used all sorts of channels in reaching out to these women. And as mentioned, they were already familiar with the community. So they could easily set up informal gatherings at women's houses and invite other women to those gatherings as well. An important channel was girls' schools, because even in the most conservative societies, girls' schools are considered to be a safe place, and they are found in a lot of villages and small towns as well. So over there, female teachers are present. Mothers also go to pick their girls. So that's a suitable avenue to use. And the roaming agents even made their sales pitch at wedding ceremonies. Next slide, please. So moving on to the sales pitch, what was the value proposition that was offered? Firstly, since we're talking about Haripur and rural areas, so mobility is a very important barrier. Women are reluctant to visit the physical branch of a bank. So these roaming agents told them that now the account can be opened easily at their doorstep, and KYC and documentation requirements, everything has become simpler. So the women were very attracted by that proposition. Next area of interest was payment of utility bills conveniently from their own cell phones. After that, in KP, a lot of male family members actually send remittances from other parts of the country. So that was an added attraction for these women if they don't have to go to the agent to receive those remittances. Next, the nano loans that were offered were very popular. So these were extremely small size, rupees 5,000 only, but they were very suitable for meeting the everyday consumption or business needs of these women. And lastly, the Rosca product was also interesting, and also the option to save money in mobile wallets with privacy. So that was another attraction for these women. Next slide, please. If you look at the compensation structure, just for the purposes of this pilot, it was decided to opt for a a flat salary. So these roaming agents were hired at rupees 18,000 per month. And they were also communicated that if they miss their monthly targets twice in a row, then their compensation would be withheld. So this was not the conventional incentive structure that is normally employed by financial institutions or other marketing organizations. But we do propose that if an incentive structure is offered in the long run, that would be more successful. And the incentive can be based on number of new accounts opened, the transactions carried out by those accounts, the products pitched to the customers. Agents typically make commission on transactions as well, but State Bank has also waived some of the charges, so that would affect their profitability. If we look at the overall profitability of the agents, then it helps if they're offering multiple services. If they're offering a couple of digital financial services together, that contributes to their profitability. And in China, we've seen that Alibaba was able to set up a large number of e-commerce agents very quickly, and it was able to scale up its model at a much more rapid pace than conventional banks because its agents were offering a couple of products together. So that helped with their profitability and also helped with their sustainability. Another example is from Nigeria, which Jacqueline will also touch upon in her discussion. And over there, it was found that once you bundle different products together, so you have a savings product and a credit product, then those products together contribute towards the profitability of not just the agent, but also the bank as a whole. And another thing that needs to be given attention is that the agents should pay attention to SOPs. And if they need support with that, then that is something that the financial institution should help with. Next slide, please. So just looking at what didn't work and what might need more work in the future. So since we were talking about rural KP, so the merchant partner had a limited network and that affected the functioning of the pilot. Also, since this was done a while back, so not all of the utility bills could be paid through the app, but still the customers were happy to pay whichever bills they could through this mobile application. Also, since these roaming agents were new to this business, so some of them exhausted their limits before the close of the fourth quarter, and then they were unable to do further transactions. Internet connectivity was an issue at times. Also, it was a very new mobile application that was developed. So much troubleshooting was required, much hand-holding at the back end was required, and that's something that needs to be given attention, especially because during times of pandemic, if certain facilities are not available, then online channels should be available at all times, and they should be accessible by both customers and agents to resolve whatever problems come up. Thank you. So those were the learnings from the pilot. We hope that financial institutions can take up some features of these models and include them in their business models and use them to increase the representation of women in their portfolio and encourage more women to use more financial services. Thank you, Harun. So with this, we would move on to the panel discussion. The moderator is Rehan Akhtar, who is the Chief Digital Officer at Karandaaz, and he's joined by a couple of international experts who would talk about the effectiveness of roaming agents as a vehicle to improve women's financial inclusion. So over to Rehan.
Thank you, Amna. Thank you, Samra, for the introduction. So, as Amna mentioned, the title of the panel is Female Roaming Agents as a Potential Channel for Improving Financial Inclusion, specifically for women. And I'll just start with a quote of a research. According to the 2017 Global Findex research, it shows that in Pakistan, 31% of Pakistan's women, these are aged 15 plus, they are engaged in borrowing. However, if we look at the formal sources, this drops to a mere 1%. Similarly, more than 30% of the women said in that survey that they set aside money for savings. However, when we look at the formal financial institutions, it's only 2%. Time and again, what we have seen is that women are left out, and also in financial services, we see that a lot of women, they're not targeted by the financial institutions. While there could be supply side problems, there are also problems embedded in the social norms. But you're talking about the supply side, what the financial institutions can do. There could be barriers like the banks or the agents not located in close proximity, adding to the distance, adding to the effort to go to a banking service. There's also a lot of apprehension of documentation that is required, and also a lot of these surveys kind of show that the low to middle income basically in general feel that the banks are not for them. They're not welcome there. The environment and everything is not developed to encourage women to come and transact with them. It's very heartening to see that the State Bank of Pakistan has also come up with a policy document, which then also becomes the guiding principles for the financial institutions of what steps they need to take. Email roaming agents and the pilot that we did with Finca, that's kind of an effort to test out if the hypothesis really works, and we have looked at some of the results. While some of the things work, but there are a lot of learnings as well. And with me, there's an esteemed panel joining from all over the other side of the world. We have representatives from Women World Bank, CGAP, and University of Yale. If you could turn on the videos, please, for the panelists. So what I'll do is, I'll sort of one by one let you introduce yourself briefly as well. But as you sort of introduce yourself and your organization for our listeners and viewers, could you also sort of give a very brief perspective about how do you see, so for how, however way you are involved in this work, how do you see the gender gap, especially, if you have a perspective about gender gap in Pakistan? And generally, do you see that there is action being taken, a positive action being taken, even if not in Pakistan, but otherwise, to address this gender gap in whatever sort of jurisdictions that you have an observation of? And do we see that the financial institutions are now started to target women as customers, or by and large it's just a theory for now and has not been really sort of put into action? So in no particular order, if we could start with Hannah.
Sure. Hi, thank you so much for having me, and good afternoon, everyone on the call. My name is Hannah Schiff, and I am since January working with CGAP, which is CGAP is a kind of independent institute housed within the World Bank that focuses on financial inclusion for poverty alleviation, and recently has added a kind of gender integration aspect to its mission across all of its work. And the project that I'm working on, I'm the gender specialist for a project that focuses on cash in, cash out networks. And so really the focus is last mile distribution, that question of how will we be able to extend financial services into rural areas and untapped market segments, underserved market segments. And since cash still dominates in those places and those segments, the transition to digital financial services, which has a lot of promise for financial inclusion, still requires that strong network of agents who can convert cash to digital currency and vice versa. So hence our sort of emphasis on this lens of cash in, cash out, but really agents more broadly, since as we've seen in a lot of cases, they're doing that cash in, cash out transaction, but there are other services and transactions that they're providing kind of around that as well. And so in this project, it started with a kind of global review of best practices, examples from different countries in terms of expanding and deepening those agent networks. And now we've begun So the gender component kind of began in earnest just this past January, so about 3 months ago when I joined. And what we're doing now is translating our sort of global perspective into in-country work with stakeholders on the ground in 6 countries, including Pakistan will be one of them. And so it's great timing in a way. We're just kind of kicking off the work in earnest in Pakistan. But so Rehan, did you want me to go into a little bit of the perspective now, or should I pause with my introduction and then later?
Yeah, so I'll come back to you later once we have this introduction round. So I'll now move to Charity, over to you for your introduction and perspective on gender gap of from the work that you have been doing.
Great, thank you, Rehan, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. I am Charity Troyer-Moore. I am South Asia, or Director of South Asia Economics Research at Yale University's Macmillan Center, and I also oversee a team known as Inclusion Economics that also operates in India as Inclusion Economics India. We used to be known as EPOD India, and then also in Nepal at the Governance Lab. So my familiarity with this subject comes from working on research on the ground, on kind of the front lines with women focused on increasing their financial inclusion and economic activities in rural parts of India. So I work primarily in rural Madhya Pradesh and Bihar, which in some ways there are some similarities, I think, to some of the contexts that you would find in Pakistan there as well. And have worked on a variety of different studies focused on either increasing women's engagement with the formal financial system or finding ways to connect women to other women who are engaged with the formal financial system. So as an example, right now I'm working with the state of Bihar with their self-help groups to launch and evaluate an expansion of a program known as the Bank Saki program, where women from SHGs are now placed in customer service point locations to serve as kind of banking kiosk operators to women. So that's the type of familiarity I have. So some experience with some of the challenges that could come up as well, I think, through these types of initiatives. And this one by Finca and Karandaaz is extremely exciting, I must say. So thank you.
Thank you, Charity. And Jacqueline, so Women World Banking is also directly involved in some of the very similar pilots, that we have worked. So, with your introduction, could you also, talk about some of these pilot or projects that you have been involved, and also talk about, what evidence do you see that having female agents can actually be a very potent channel for tapping into women segments, because especially for our audience in Pakistan, this is something quite new. While we have some experiments, but by and large, we don't have women as agents in Pakistan. Over to you.
Great, thank you. And it's so nice to be here and speak with you all. So my name is Jacqueline Burfund. I lead monitoring and evaluation at Women's World Banking. For those of you that are not familiar with Women's World Banking, we are a global nonprofit. We work with financial service providers primarily in about 30 countries. We have a network of 56 financial service providers that we work with. And those are different types of FSPs, so commercial banks, mobile network operators, microfinance institutions. And we really work with them to develop products, channels, and marketing that works for low-income women and brings them into the formal financial sector. And so, Rehan, as you have rightly pointed out, that is really the focus of our work, is to really design, pilot, test, and hopefully roll out solutions that work for low-income women. And we've done this in a variety of contexts. A little bit later, I'll talk more about our work in Nigeria, where we specifically developed a network of roaming agents that could support low-income women market traders. We've also done some pilots in Pakistan to develop stationary female agents. And really what we see is that Certainly women are more comfortable with women agents. It's a way to bring them into the formal financial sector to build trust. As you rightly pointed out, in almost every context we work in, women feel that banks and formal financial services are not for them. And so to make them feel comfortable, make them feel welcome, and trust that service with their hard-earned money is something that needs to be built, and female agents are certainly a way to do that. We also find that, especially as we move into a digitized world, this segment of the population especially needs that human touch element, whether it's to build their capacity or to build that trust. And so female agents are certainly a way to kind of pair with digital financial services and bring that service to low-income women. So happy to talk more about it, and really looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, thank you. So Charity, let me start with you, and your work on women economic empowerment and self-help groups in South Asia. So the key question is, how do you see women agents as an influencer? So what are your views? And if you could sort of talk about some evidence, and if there's some comparisons you could share with our listeners.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a great question. So we don't have direct evidence on women as agents and how that, changes women's aspirations or financial inclusion vis-a-vis a comparison of a male agent. That's actually something that we're hoping, in our current study to be able to speak to. I do think there's a large body of evidence, though, that suggests that women who are in leadership positions can really empower other women in their communities, other households. They can change views around whether it's appropriate for women to do something. And this comes from some of the research related to reservation systems. So when a woman has been, a female seat has been reserved for a panchayat leadership, you'll see later on that, aspirations for girls increase, and, these views around kind of what women's role in society should be changes as well. We've also done some research that suggests that just, part of the process of becoming more financially included does actually change women's views of themselves and their roles in society. And this comes specifically from a study where we look at what happens when you open bank accounts for women, provide training for those women, and then link those payments to direct benefit transfer payments that were coming from Narega's work, or India's workfare program, Narega. And as a result of that, then we see that women's views and their husbands' views related to whether it's appropriate for her to, move around and work outside the home become a bit more relaxed. And this was in a very conservative area where women had very limited mobility overall. So for us, this was very exciting. And, there are, strong signals that it generally empowers women. Now, that's not fully tied to financial inclusion, but the point is that these downstream outcomes can be very impactful overall.
No, great point. You mentioned earlier on work related to self-help groups and Bank Saki, if that's the right pronunciation. I know it's not a formal agent, but I think what I understand is it's also an influencer on the fellow sort of members. Could you sort of share some insights on that role and how that role actually influences the fellow members of the self-help group? Something maybe we can sort of draw parallel with the agent network.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, women just seeing another woman who goes and leads as someone who's taking care of transactions for them. And in this case, this woman actually is a formal banking agent and serves both male and female clients. I mean, that's something that's quite inspiring and inspirational for women who think that they're, they shouldn't be enrolled or, involved in the formal financial system. And, a bank is a man's space. When you put a female in a banking, kiosk, I mean, that changes minds quite quickly. And in fact, what we found in some of our work so far is it's interesting because since India has kind of opened bank accounts for everyone, and now there are more female agents overall, there's this idea that, financial systems and financial transactions actually don't have to be gendered. And in fact, women take on many more of the transactions from what we've seen more recently than they did in the past, and even sometimes more so than men. It's now considered kind of a household responsibility. If you're a housewife, you need to go take care of the finances at the local kiosk. Now, I can't tie that back to, having a female operator, but those types of steps, to include women in the formal financial system really have changed views on women's role in society, even in a place like rural Bihar, where 5% of women are technically, working outside the home. They're doing lots of agricultural labor, but other than that, they're not doing much in the formal labor market. But somehow these norms around banking have really changed. And I think, that's an important pathway to potentially empower women in the long run.
Mhm. That's very interesting to note that these women agents, they're not just dedicated to women, but they're available and they're serving all kind of customers. And just out of curiosity, are these sort of full-fledged agents? I mean, they have the ability to do all kind of transaction which a regular agent would be able to do, or was there some truncated or limited sort of ability that they have?
Nope, these are full-fledged agents and they're hired by a variety of different banking partners. Now, what happens is the SHG related leadership that's based in the state they do recruitment and they do supplemental training for these women. And I think, the training needs are substantial and there needs to be some handholding along the way. So, there are lots of kind of challenges to selecting the right Sakis and then making sure that they have the support that they need. But, anecdotally, what we're told is these women are as effective, if not more effective, once they're established as kiosk operators. I mean, they have everything to lose. This is really important to them that they're able to have these positions. So they do quite well once they're established and set up. So that's been what we've heard. And like I said, we will test this actually quantitatively.
Okay. So Jacqueline, transitioning to you and your experience. And by the way, for the viewers, if you have any question to the panelists, if you want to ask a direct question, if you could type in with the name, which panelist you want to answer, so please type in. So Jacqueline, some of the pilots that you earlier on mentioned in the start, if you could explain to our audience what those pilots were, or talk about one, and also some of the real deep insights which may be useful for our listeners.
Absolutely. So, I wanted to start with our experience in Nigeria. I know it's a very different cultural context, but I think it has some really relevant learnings here. So we partnered with a commercial bank in Nigeria called Diamond Bank. They, had a very large branch footprint, but what we were seeing is that the women market traders who were really right outside the doorstep of the bank did not feel comfortable going in, did not feel like this was a bank or a place for them. And so we really wanted to create a channel that would work for them and would also meet their needs. They talked not only about not feeling comfortable going to the branch, but also that they didn't have time. They had busy lives and responsibilities, and going and waiting online at a branch, which is very common in Nigeria, was not something they felt like was worthwhile for them to do. But they were saving, they were putting money aside, keeping it at home. But by keeping it at home, they felt like it was kind of seeping out through those little needs that come up throughout the day. And so there are informal channels in Nigeria, and I'm sure in other markets as well, where you have savings collectors who walk around and go and pick up savings throughout the day. But in Nigeria, there was this perception that while these were quite common, they were prone to fraud. You never really knew where this person was coming from and, if they were going to run off with your money. And so, we really wanted to mimic the convenience and the trust that was created through these informal channels, but provided through a safe and convenient way with Diamond Bank. And so we created the Beta program. Beta means good in Pidgin English. And it was really meant to be, it started out just as a savings program. Customers were offered an account. We had roaming agents called Beta Friends who were kind of well marketed, very visible in the market, and were walking around and there to sign people up for accounts, to collect savings, and you could even do withdrawals up to a certain amount from the Beta Friends as well. And I think Amna also mentioned this, the way we really structured this to make sure that it was a profitable channel for the bank was to bundle a variety of services that could be offered through the Beta Friends. So there was a kind of standard account, there was a commitment savings mechanism for those that wanted to save toward a goal, and there was also a short-term loan that was offered, similar to what it sounds like your nano loan, where based on the savings behavior, the customers could be pre-approved for credit. And so this was a way for, to make this sustainable for the bank, and it was a really attractive proposition for the customers. Over the course of the program, we actually did roll out and reached over 600,000 customers. So it was quite successful for the bank as kind of bringing in a completely new customer segment. Now, interestingly, because of course we're here to talk about women customers, this was something that was, designed for women, but it was open to women and men. And we saw that uptake by men was also strong. The outreach ended up being about 38% women, which was a significant improvement for the bank, but interesting that you still have 62% who are men. And so this is something that, we find time and time again, if you design with women in mind, it tends to work for men as well. And that's not a problem. We don't think that's a bad thing. We think it makes it more sustainable for the financial institutions that are offering it, as long as you are keeping those women's needs in mind. And just one or two other kind of small pieces of information just on kind of the structure that might be useful. So the Better Friends were hired, so they did have a base salary, but it was very incentive based, their salary and compensation. And they did get incentives for the number of women accounts that were opened, as well as the balances in those accounts, women's accounts specifically. And we did specific marketing drives to really bring in women. And we saw significant increases in the number of women account opened and the balances on those accounts when the agents were incentivized to focus on women customers. So it's definitely a core part of the interaction. And I know we're short on time, but I'll just quickly mention another project that I thought would be relevant, which is several years ago, we partnered with Jazz, as well as Unilever in Pakistan and Karandaaz as well, actually, to pilot stationary female agents. So these were called goodie badges. They were retailers who distributed Unilever products, and Jazz Cash onboarded them to become agents for their mobile money. And this was a really interesting pilot. It's very challenging to onboard female agents. We had, I believe, 32 female agents who were onboarded as part of the pilot. And despite the challenges, which we can get into at a different time, we did see that they were able to significantly increase their outreach to women customers. So just as one point, Jazz had a 17% women customer base overall. These female agents were able to onboard 42% women customers. So the potential there, I think, is huge. I'll pause there.
Yeah. I also remember, I think it was an associated work that you were also doing with Jazz, which was basically changing the messaging. And I remember a very sort of, if you want to talk about it as well, I think it will be good for the audience.
Sure. Yeah, the agent program was not done in isolation. We also had a referral program. So we were, we really feel that women really do go to trusted resources in their community. And so if existing Jazz customers could send a referral to their female friends and relations, then this would actually promote the product use. And we tested different types of messaging. So there were some messages that were more communal. So, women in Pakistan are saving, join them. And some that were much more personal, like you could save for your goal to, for your child's education. And so we saw some really interesting results of which types of messages resonated more with different parts of the population. And we did see, huge numbers of women who were using these referral services, and that did increase Jazz Cash's female customer base over the year. We can't say it was solely because of the messaging, but we do see that Jazz went from, I believe it was like 11% to 17% women in their overall customer base.
Some of these results are available for public consumption, Jacqueline,
Yes,
please
we have the
share with us.
publication. I'll drop them in the chat, the links.
Yeah, if you could do that. So Hannah, coming to you, and so CGAP has enormous amount of research, and they collect data, and they analyze and sitting on a worldview. So what is your sort of take on gender gap as a whole, even if not sort of agent as a very specific issue or a barrier? What do you think? What some of the top insights you'll be sharing with us regarding gender issues, and what are you seeing trends globally? Of what solutions are being provided to overcome that issue?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there are kind of maybe three themes that I would draw out that I think have actually already been touched on by some of the other panelists already, which is neat, but maybe I can bring in a couple of other examples as well, just to highlight them further. I think one that we're hearing a lot about is really meeting women where they are and building on existing social structures. So really trying to understand women's contexts and where they feel comfortable transacting, where they already operate, and what's kind of physically and socially possible for them to get to. And so, you know, we've heard that, I think that's kind of driving the roaming agents model. In South Africa, there's a bank called Time Bank that introduced kiosks with ambassadors into grocery stores, which is a place that women frequent, and they, you know, now have a majority of women as customers. There's even in a very rural and remote context like Papua New Guinea, we've seen examples of bringing agents kind of closer to the routes that women tend to traffic, and also recruiting women agents specifically, because as we've seen, that sort of lowers the barriers for transaction for them. And then in Indonesia, where we've done a lot of research, there's an existing kind of informal social gathering called an arisan that typically, it's a little bit like a rasta, which has already been mentioned, but it's something deep in Indonesian culture where groups of typically women, wives, you know, would gather and pool their money and then buy a different product or put it toward a different, you know, major expense on a regular basis, like let's say once a month. And so there's a fintech company that offered a kind of digital platform to build on this that also, you know, they partnered with e-commerce providers. And so the women were able to kind of more safely and conveniently store their cash that they were collecting via this digital platform, but also use that platform to make transactions with these e-commerce providers. And so that, I think, kind of leads me to another point, which is around the second point around bundling services to make sure that, especially in these rural contexts, that agents can be viable. I think in a few of the places we've worked, one of the key challenges is that the transaction volume, just in general, not even thinking about women, but just in general, the transaction volume isn't high enough for the agents to really make a go of it. And so they tend to drop off. But I think that actually, you know, this is an area where the gap in usage among women, so just like you said, Rehan, I think in many parts of the world, women are already using financial services. They're just informal and they're expensive and they're not, you know, ideal really as they could be. And so the transitioning them to more formal financial services and better products and services has the potential to also increase those transaction volumes, which would make the networks and the agents more viable in general. And so, you know, like bundling the services around e-commerce or the Jazz Cash example, where they're also retailing other products, really making sure that there's a strong use case value proposition for women to take the effort to do something new and to come and use these agents. And then last point, I'll just keep it brief, but the third one is, and it was mentioned already too, but capacity building and support, I think both around digital and financial literacy. So digital literacy, I mean, for example, in the Papua New Guinea case that I was mentioning, the numbers may have increased slightly since this study was done, but 50% of the population had mobile phones, but only 16% of women did. And so when my bank rolled out their women-focused card, which was called the Hibiscus card, they also set up a dedicated phone line and WhatsApp number so that women had an easy way to access support, get their questions answered. You know, and my bank's combination of recruiting women agents who they saw did tend to attract more women clients, and rolling out a product, financial product, a card with kind of specific incentives designed to attract women, they saw their share of women account holders increase from 37% to 42% just in 6 months. And so I think there's a strong kind of customer acquisition story and case, but you know, we have to build in those three sort of lessons from all these different examples that are very likely applicable across contexts and here in Pakistan as well.
Okay, great. Thank you, Anna. And I see, you know, some of you are responding to the participants. That's great. So, you know, but while, you know, we have these pilots and we have this evidence, But time again, we come to that point that how much more evidence do we need to present for the industry to really, initiate? And I know, there's no sort of one single answer to this, but I would really like to, invite you guys to share your perspective. And Hannah, I'll start with you. So maybe do a round robin back. So while there's evidence, there's research, and also I think in microfinance, there's enough evidence that women as customers, even if as customers who take up loan, they're better in terms of returning on time, in full, et cetera, et cetera. But still, we don't see an increase. And what is it that these financial institutions need to do? And I'm sure, some of our listeners who are from financial institutions, what is it that they need to go and tell their president of the bank or the vice president? So how do they build that business case that women's segment is not just, you're not just doing it because it's a buzzword, but this is a real segment and one must actually develop a channel, a product. And I think I really like the comment that you made, meeting women, where they are. How do you sort of initiate such a change, in the financial institutions? Any thoughts, any views on that, Hannah?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's really interesting because a lot of times the conversation, we are focusing a lot on designing specifically for women, but at the same time, it's not a niche market, right? It is more than half usually of the population in most cases, if not about half. And so just from that kind of very basic perspective, I think we need to take the view that we're failing in our businesses if we're missing such a huge segment, right? Not a niche segment. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't specific kind of needs and different design principles and things that should be used. And I like Jacqueline's comment that very often when you design for women, it also works for men. And we've seen that in a lot of examples too. But sometimes the reverse isn't true. And I would just re-emphasize kind of not assuming that when products and services ignore gender, so when they kind of just are designed with a gender neutral kind of mindset, don't assume that means that they're serving all people equally well, and actually get the data and track how usage rates and and uptake are differing. And then one layer below that, kind of trying to dig in to understand why that might be, will give you some great insights and things to try. And so, getting the data, being intentional about how things affect men and women differently, and then being intentional about design and delivery, and keeping in mind that there is, you can really, it depends on how you define your business goals and metrics, but if you want to increase, your customer acquisition, retention rates of your agents, transaction volumes, there are a number of different metrics where we've already seen success in these models that are focusing on women. So yeah, maybe I would just leave it there. Probably the other panelists have some great insights.
Sometimes I do wonder, maybe the pink counter may work. Of marketing and targeting, at a later stage. So Charity, coming to you, and G2P programs, there could be a lot more control. The design could be influenced compared to just leaving it to the private sector to figure out what they want to target. And usually, these G2P programs are also because funded by the government, so it can influence a lot more control. So what are your views? Is there still a challenge in these G2P programs to become women-centric? Do they still miss out on, really targeting women? And what are some of the gaps, and what could be done to really sort of, apply the gender lens in these programs, or even otherwise, your comments on the missing puzzle?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to piggyback on what Hannah said, women are not a niche. Women are half the market, or nearly half the market in these places. And so I think, for both GDP payments, I'll tie both of your questions together, yours for Hannah and then for me as well. For both G2P payments and for just FSPs more generally, I think the ones that started thinking about women earlier on, at least in India, have been the smarter ones, right? Now they're at kind of the forefront because there's been a real shift in terms of thinking of women as kind of, they're these addition that it would be nice to be able to enroll them in these different programs or into financial services. And now they're core customer base for many, many people and many different groups. And the FSPs that recognize that earlier on are doing quite well in saying that it's, it's such a boon that they've been able to actually attract and retain women. And I think related to what do we need to know now, how do we kind of change things and change the discussion from, does it work? I think we do need to move on from does it work? Is it a good thing to bring women into the formal financial system to how does it work? And, anyone who goes about recognizing that women are a major part of the market for them is going to need to know and understand their customers just like they did for, males when they first started, thinking about banking in general. So kind of changing that mindset to say, okay, if we're not attracting women, why not? Is it that they lack a use case? Is it that they need some training? These types of things. Those are really important questions, but we need to shift to the how instead of, is this even reasonable? And I think those that do that now, 10, 15 years from now in Pakistan will be those that have led, at the vanguard of kind of bringing women on. And, it's a very profitable venture in the end.
Any insight on what role the regulator can play in your view?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, I think there's been specific attention. Well, yeah. What can the regulator do? I think try, do gender specific design, right? So if there are regulations that are difficult for customers who are just coming into the system, like, establishing dormancy limits that make it difficult for people that have low balances to keep an active account. I mean, that does everyone a disservice. The purpose of the regulation is to, protect consumers and protect firms in some ways, but those type of regulations could be counterproductive. So I think thinking through, how can we help those that are coming into the system in particular, and in this case that would be women, is helpful. There's a role to protect those consumers.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Jacqueline, back to you. What are your thoughts? Where can a financial institution start, and how do they start? And how do these people who are also the listeners or viewers right now, they can go back, and what is the first thing that they should tell the president that, this is something we learn and we must, attend to this segment?
Yeah, I would just build off what Hannah and Charity have shared. I mean, I think that, we talk about women-centered design. So I think, starting with your customers, understanding what their needs are. I think, the data is out there where, women have less access, where women, but when they are given access, are more loyal customers, are, in the case of credit, better repayers. And even on savings, which I think is still a place where there's evidence to be built and perceptions that small scale deposits are not profitable. There's data that could be looked at to see that maybe women, deposit less but more frequently, and maybe they're more likely to purchase other products from an institution. So I think as we can start to build that evidence and understand really the behavior of your women customers, it will help to inform that design to better engage them. And I think for financial service providers, the evidence that's lacking is on that profitability or commercial viability of these solutions. And so I think the more that we can share within the sector to show that, women are, a profitable segment, and they're not just one segment, as as my colleagues have mentioned, but specific segments of women can be really interesting customers for a financial institution is incredibly important. And I would just also touch on the policy side. I think policymakers and regulators have a huge role to play, both in terms of the services that financial institutions can provide, but also on being more proactive. Things like collateral registries or things that will help women access financial services that they might not otherwise have been able to do, are things where policymakers, I think, can also be proactive in addition to fostering, of course, consumer protection.
No, very important points. Thank you. Any specific thoughts on, and again, open to any of the panelists, because with roaming agents, there is a risk, of fraud, less trackability. Usually when the agent is stationary, you know, it's perceived to be in a lot more control. Also for customers, you know, they know where to go. And so I mean, what is your observation globally, if you have any, regarding this, that is this a risk which is also perceived in other jurisdictions, and how have policymakers and regulators sort of, you know, controlled that risk? Hannah, I see you turn on your mic.
Yeah,
so
I unmuted. I unmuted because CGAP has done quite a bit of work recently on consumer protection and risk, consumer risk. And you know, and we're just now kind of knitting together that with the gender work. But I think one aspect that comes out quite strongly where there's overlap is the capacities and digital and financial literacy. That being, you know, that is one of the things that makes women and other segments that have limited capacities more vulnerable to those risks. And so, so that may be one avenue. But I do think that, you know, in general, regulators do need to take an approach that doesn't squash innovation on the one hand, but on the other hand, puts in adequate protections, especially for more vulnerable segments. So yes, that's very important.
Okay. I know we're running out of time. I have a lot of questions I still wanted to cover, but I'll start concluding. But, you know, just final thought based on the work that you guys have been involved in. There's also this difficulty of actually, because, you know, there are not many agents out there who are women. So I remember in the work that Women World Bank did, you know, for the retailers as women, there was also this concern of if they are actually attending to, let's say, a huge amount of cash, you know, there could be also a target of, you know, theft or you know, stuff like that. So do you find any evidence, you know, where there's reluctance for women to become the agents as well, and what barriers or what measures these financial institutions, you know, should be thinking about when actually, you know, deploying women agents on their own? Any views on that? Anyone?
I'll say that in the cases that we've seen of successful female agents, a lot of times, you know, just like, you know, anyone needs support within the household, these agents do benefit from having supportive households and families. Now, whether that's so that they can go out of the house and work at all, but I think this also relates to issues of safety and liquidity and so on. You know, just knowing women that have operated in kind of vulnerable locations, you know, when they're carrying cash to and fro, large amounts of it, that can be stress inducing and a bit unsafe. But, you know, if they have a spouse or family member that's also either willing to go with them or actually does that part of the job so she can stay and man the kiosk, so to speak, that's actually been quite effective overall. And, you know, I've seen some really productive relationships where, you know, there were these strategies to deal with that sort of issue.
Okay. Yeah, Jacqueline.
And just to add off that, I think the social norms aspect is really important. And I think, you know, having the support in our work with Jazz, we found that the retailers who had supportive family members who were involved in helping them to set up kind of the agent business, if you will, as well as, you know, supporting their role was critical. But just on the safety and security issue, you know, there are workarounds you can find. In Nigeria, actually, the better friends who worked around the marketplace were required to go back to the bank branch at a certain threshold of cash. So they, you know, weren't required to carry cash all day. And, you know, this does limit the kind of perimeter, which you can walk literally, but it does provide some security in a context where there was a lot of worry about theft in Lagos in particular. And so I think there are kind of interesting solutions you can find. And for female agents in particular, you know, the idea of having, you know, pairs or having, you know, structures that really support them to feel more comfortable is really interesting.
Thank you for those comments. So we are at the end of our panel. So I would really like to thank everyone, Charity, Jacqueline, and Hannah, for joining us all the way from the other side of the world. And have a good morning. And Amna, over to you.
Thank you, Rehan, and thank you to all the panelists and also to all the attendees. I think a couple of very interesting points were raised. So I thoroughly enjoyed the discussion. Jacqueline did help to point out the blind spots on both the sides, that the banks feel that women do deposit smaller amounts, but they don't realize that it's done more frequently. And at the same time, customers also think women feel that they don't have the time and they don't want to go to the bank, even if it's right next to them. Yeah, those are the norms we have to counter in different parts of the world. So that was a very valid point. Hannah also mentioned the different channels, the different types of kiosks and agents used in different parts of the world, and the things that should be paid attention to. And rightly talked about consumer protection, which is very important when we're dealing with customers spread out in remote areas, and especially when we're dealing with women. So those are the things that should be given attention to. And Charity, thank you for your time. I think this is a very interesting discussion around the fact that, for one, women are not a niche, they are half of the market. And then also, once you start offering them financial services, how does that lead to a change in norms, a change in roles, a change in the division of labor? So that helps to exemplify that once you provide these services, once you give these forms of choices to women, then everything changes, and that does lead to their empowerment as well. Very interesting points. Hope the audience is able to implement some of them in their business models, and hope that helps to move the needle on financial inclusion of women in the country. So once again, I'd like to thank the panelists and the attendees, and yeah, have a good day to the panelists, and thank you to all the attendees. So we'll end this here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies. Thank you, Samra.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.